I think that politics is, again, it's a profession on itself. You can be the best scientist in the world and a terrible, terrible politician. And actually, it's almost guaranteed to be like that, because science is about truth eventually, whereas politics is about power, and truth and power pull you in opposite directions. Politics is never just about the truth. You need some ingredient of truth there, but this is not the way that you win an election.
Well, welcome to this, the 8th installment of my Aletheia Dialogues on Whistleblowing series. Well, Mandy Wiener very kindly inscribed a message in her book, The Whistleblowers, which, to be honest, rather reinforced my sense of imposter syndrome. She said, "Keep speaking truth to power. You are a reminder of how powerful one lone voice can be against the influence of the many in authority." Now, I had helped Mandy with one of the chapters of her book, but after I had finished reading the other 12 or so chapters, my effort to speak truth to power seemed positively feeble compared to the extraordinary heroic efforts of all the other people featured. So for the past 8 months or so, I've been making it my business to reach out to them and to support whistleblowers to try and help me live up to my image. Well, over my 40-year career as a social worker, I've been lucky to be involved in some really good outcomes in difficult and complex situations. And people mistakenly jump to the conclusion I can walk on water. Well, the truth of the matter, that's an illusion. I just happen to have worked out where the stepping stones are just below the surface. And I just look for the next one that is within my stride, keep going, and generally it takes me to the other side of the river. Well, today I've invited a panel of people who have been grappling with the tendency of power and truth to diverge, as Yuval Noah Harari noted in the introductory clip, to help me examine this question. What do political parties need to do within their own ranks to undo a culture of corruption and promote a culture of truth-telling? Now, it arose out of my dialogue with Themba Maseko, whose book, For My Country, narrates his really challenging story of whistleblowing, which cost him his job as a senior government official. And in his book, Themba explains how his difficulties of working as Director General for the late Princess Stella Sigcau, who was Minister of Public Works. He prefaces the story of his degenerating relationship with her by reminding us that in 1996, during the Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearings, General Bantu Holomisa had disclosed that Princess Sigcau had taken a 50,000 rand bribe, essentially to keep her quiet about a 2 million rand bribe that the gambling magnate Sol Kerzner had paid to the Transkei government to get gambling rights for the Transkei Homeland. Well, General Holomisa was expelled for making a public disclosure of corruption and wrongdoing, which is what defines a whistleblower. That's what they do. His offence wasn't because he had disclosed wrongdoing, but that he had done so publicly, without first raising it within the ANC structures. However, there were no consequences for Minister Sigcau. She kept her job as a cabinet minister up until when she died in 2006. Now, just imagine where South Africa could have been today had the ANC instead adopted a culture of encouragement of truth-telling back then. There would have been no arms deal, no state capture, no Ace Magashule. Andrew Feinstein might today be the Minister of Finance instead of having left the country. Unfortunately, ever since 1996, sadly, the governing party has been playing further and further beyond the offside line. They have not listened to the whistle being blown, and instead they have punished those who try to blow it. Now, Bantu Holomisa was doing then what other ANC members like Thabiso, Zulu, Zintiso Makaka, Mos Pakau, Jimmy Mohlala, Themba Maseko, and others whose stories feature in Mandy's book have tried to do, expose wrongdoing. They should be celebrated, not persecuted. And the killers of those who have been assassinated for blowing the whistle need to be still brought to justice. How do we stop the problem at its source? How do we encourage the speaking of truth, not just to power, and even just about power, but within power? Political parties are where power is hatched. If in the cradle truth becomes subordinate to power, Well, how can we expect anything else but the misrule that we've seen over the last decades? Well, we need to embrace the benefits of hindsight and seek to reboot. But so far I've got Dr. Dale McKinley, Catherine Hunter and Thabiso Zulu to grapple with these issues. Dale, would you like to kick things off?
Just to say that, yeah, I go quite a bit further back than the civil society, going back all the way to the 1980s and the ANC underground, as well as within the Communist Party, of which I was expelled for blowing the whistle of a different sort 20-something years ago. Two things. One was to address the question you asked, but in terms of, I think where whistleblowing, where we need to sort of look at whistleblowing, in my experience, is there's different kinds of whistleblowers. And depending upon what you're blowing the whistle on, depends on how you get treated and how you get responded to. So in political parties in particular, there is a tendency in all political parties to sort of close the wagons, circle the wagons, close the door, basically to, just like the thin blue line in the police, is you protect each other, you don't air your dirty laundry, you keep it inside. So you know, basically the loyalty to the party comes first, then goes outside of that in a political party spectrum, basically gets punished. And I think in most cases, or sidelined or marginalized, and all of the different kinds of things we've talked about. But I wanted to say that I think that where it would be useful to differentiate would be, you know, in terms of political parties, is criticism of the party politically, ideologically, the way it's running, all these other kinds of things, which tends to get people sidelined very much because they're seen as dissenters or non-cooperators, and blowing the whistle on corruption and criminal activity. What I found, my experience in the Communist Party, was I was expelled for trying to defend the SACP Constitution, because the SACP Constitution was very clear in what it expected of its cadres. And when I attempted to try to apply that to ministers, deputy ministers, and very high-profile SACP members at the time, the late 1990s, and say, you need to implement the Constitution. In other words, you are violating the very basis of your membership in this party. That's when it turned on to me. So I think if any political party is going to be worth its salt, which unfortunately we don't have too many that are, they will then pay attention and protect whistleblowers who are blowing the whistle on, for example, people in the party who are not adhering to those policies, who are not adhering to what's agreed. We see this in the ANC. Once you do not do that, it's a slippery slope. Then you cannot basically hold anybody responsible for anything. It becomes a political football and playing field. And I think this is the crucial thing. Whereas criticism politically and ideologically and about the party and the way it's operating is a whole nother story. But my experience here is that basically the fundamental reason why we're in the situation we're in, and I have written about this extensively within the ANC, within the Communist Party, and within broad civil society, it's not specific to political parties, is that we have largely, as a society, we've lost the moral grounding in our society. We've lost the basis to be on the things that drove largely the liberation struggle, with exceptions, which were empathy, solidarity, honesty, humbleness, sacrifice, all these personal attributes that one would think of as an activist and as a person. These have been tossed out the window.
Yeah. I thought that would be a good point at which to invite Thabiso Zulu, because at least there's some evidence to suggest that it hasn't been entirely lost. And I've just been so extraordinarily impressed with the way in which he's been, conducting his efforts to try and expose political corruption and violence at the local government level. So, Thabiso.
No, thanks, John, and I appreciate to follow on the footsteps of people like Dale. Those are the veterans that we've been looking up upon, but they may not know. One of the important things that I think he has covered is in the political parties themselves, there are no proper personal attributes that will make other people to aspire to be like those leaders. In this latest political field, it's more about ambitions, it's about accumulating power, accumulating wealth, and it's no longer about assisting and making sure that we liberate poor people. In the environment that, on the things that have been exposed on, as we are aware, John, it's not only myself. I've worked with someone who have paid a heavy price for exposing corruption. His name is Mandla Ngcobo. You can Google him. He's a veteran of the ANC, and he still is, having worked the underground structures of the movement. He became a deputy mayor of the municipality. After that, there was a lot of corruption that was taking place, me and others. He tried to enter with it.
So just to introduce myself, I suspect that I'm on this panel largely because of family members, funnily, in that I have one sibling who was a whistleblower, in one of its multiple definitions during the apartheid era, and one sibling who was a whistleblower post or during democratic days. So I've been exposed very up close to what the experience is of a whistleblower. I myself was a political activist in the 80s, also tasted a bit of the underground, got caught very quickly, so gave that up, worked above ground. I've stayed relatively close to some of the political discourse since then. And I in particular want to pick up on some of the things that Dale said with respect to the values, because my concern about a conversation about whistleblowers and where to go to from here, I fully understand why we need to look at the governing party in particular, and I'm glad you said that as being the party that's most likely to be open to corruption, is because I think that a lot of the corruption that needs to be whistleblown about is not party specific. It is to do with the society, as Dale hinted at. Also, I want to challenge maybe the idea that it's to do with personal values, because I think that our political values, our political culture nationwide lends itself to a docile, submissive, manipulable citizenry. And that's what we need to be challenging far more broadly than just within political parties. Of course, leaders need to be chopped off. There's no doubt about that. People need to speak up. But I think that, and I think we've probably all been exposed to it, that in many different environments, whether it's community, whether it's in workspaces, wherever we find ourselves, there are multiple influences that can make us bow down and shut up. And those need to be challenged. I work in the space now of management and leadership, and it's remarkable how people really believe that they need to keep quiet. And, there are obvious economic reasons. People need to protecting their jobs and so on. I want to highlight 4 particular words to add to the ones that Dale listed, that I think have caused so much confusion in terms of at all levels of society, because they can be so manipulated. They're totally positive values, and they are the following. One is this issue of respect. Now, there's not a single culture or religion that does not hold respect as a very high value, and we are all brought up to respect. In fact, how we demonstrate that or how we interpret that word, they're very wide-ranging interpretations. And often when whistleblowers, or the minor form of whistleblowers, when people just challenge a boss or somebody more senior, they are regarded as being disrespectful, or all sorts of insults are thrown at their way. So the whole idea of assertiveness is not valued in society, and I think we need to challenge that wherever we go. The other ones, which I can easily go into, loyalty, accountability, and doing the right thing. I think all of those 4 are obviously positive values, but they get abused by people in senior positions, whatever level of seniority, whether it's government or whether it's a manager or a supervisor or whatever. People can manipulate those terms. And if we don't, at a very basic level in society, assert the need to assert oneself and what is right, and tease out what is right, because even that is not so clear. Is it right according to the Constitution? Is it right according to my parents? Is it right according to my church? And so on. You can go on. We don't all have the same idea about what is the right thing to do. So I think those are the kind of conversations that need to be happening throughout. And I hope that's why I'm here, is because that is my passion. That is what I study, that is what I promote, is not just at a political party level, but right throughout society. We need to be questioning and challenging and cohering in terms of what do we mean by those terms.
I mean, for me, what's really been a blazing insight, which I can't quite let go of, is this idea that is that I've come to be, suspicious of people that hold power in any significant way in terms of their perspective on reality. And that's why I've just so enjoyed working with whistleblowers, because you get a feeling that they are actually, because of the sacrifice and the difficulties and the circumstances that they're in, that they are more likely to be, giving a more truthful, accurate perspective than people with power. The question of how power corrupts and how it distorts and leads to a tendency for people to lose perspective on reality.
Thanks, John. My experience in the political parties and with dealing with people, it was amazing. Those of you, so I was running a political bookshop in the early 90s. And before the ANC came to power, every other day you would see Joe Slovo there, you would see Thabo Mbeki, you would see all of these people, they were there talking, everything. As soon as they got to power, you don't see them anymore because now they're in positions of power. And I think this gets into a larger conversation about the way in which we have our political system and the state and institutions. But fundamentally, I think what the problem is that whatever the power position, whether it's the state, whether it's in corporations, whether it's in civil society for that matter, is that the way in which we have structured our institutions is hierarchical. It's necessarily exclusive. It's about those that are up there and these that are down here. So to give you an example, the organization I now work with, ILRIG, the International Labor Research and Information Group, I think we're the only NGO in the country that I know about where everybody gets paid the same. From the cleaner to myself with a doctorate degree and 40 years of experience, we all get paid the same. There's no hierarchy in the organization, and that produces accountability because nobody can hide behind position, nobody can hide behind and use power and other things. And so I think this is crucial, is that if we're going to talk about accountability, if we're going to talk about the things that Catherine mentioned and all the other aspects, then we need to practice what we preach in the way in which we structure our institutions, in the way in which we build our organizations, in the way in which we relate to each other. Because other than that, then we're always going to have these positions of power where accountability is seen as something that is, beyond those that are in power. They can basically do whatever they want to do and get away with it. And I think this has been the story. And I just wanted to just come back onto one thing, which was to say, I totally agree with what Catherine was talking about. The other thing is to say that there are different kinds of whistleblowers. So I don't think that we can just simply say all whistleblowers are the whistleblower. Some people blow the whistle because they have gotten shafted one way or the other, and they've had factional battles to be that. So we need to be quite careful. Our experience in the Right to Know campaign, we were approached by all sorts of whistleblowers, and when we investigated, we found out that it had more to do with personal and factional battles within an organization than it had to do. It didn't mean that it wasn't useful, but I think we need to be careful about that.
Yeah, I see Thabiso is back.
John, I'm more comfortable with the learning from others.
Humility. See, I told you that we haven't lost all those virtues.
I think this on and off.
I'm going to suggest we open up the floor now because I know that the other people on this group that have got contributions to make. What really is concerning me right now, if I can bring it down to lived reality, is the weaponizing of the internal disciplinary processes. I now know of two people that are really being dumped upon by their boards and their management because they are trying to speak truth to it. There is two types of power. There's power over and there's power with.
And we hate the word power. God, we hate the word power. Let me give you a simple definition of power from Martin Luther King. Power is just the ability to affect change. And then let me tell you about powerlessness. As someone who's spent my entire career studying shame and fear, powerlessness is the most dangerous state that we can ever experience. It leads to violence, isolation, shame, self-harm. Power is just the ability to affect change. For somehow, we have come to the belief that power is finite, that if I share some with Olivia and Genia, That's 2 pieces of a pie of 8. And now I only have 6/8 of that pie left. It's a zero-sum game. But that is not power. That is power over. And power over is finite, for sure. And I think what we're witnessing across the world today is power over's last stand. We are picturing really fearful, desperate people saying, I am afraid to move from a world of power over to power with and power to shared power, a belief in power that's infinite, a belief that power doesn't run out. It's not zero sum. There is no evidence anywhere that power over is effective. Because when we lead and when we act, and even when we parent from a position of power over, we by definition disempower people who have great experiences, ideas, and stories to bring to the table. If we want to change, if we're tired of this story, so our work right now is to figure out what we can do differently and start to work around privilege, around power, and around perspective taking to believe people's stories and experiences.
I think let's make this a more inclusive thing, and let me practice what I preach about not being too powerful and power over you all. Come join the party.
I don't know that I have too much in response to what you're saying, except to say, of course, I agree. I think that there is much more recognition of the need for valuing what whistleblowers bring to the growth of democracy generally. And it's not so much a dirty word anymore. Listen, of course, there are many pockets of places where it's still regarded as being disloyal. And I think that's one of the edges, the knife edges that we haven't really sorted out, is that of course, people want you to be loyal to the party, to the organization, to whoever, and so on. That should mean that if you're behind the barricade of loyalty, that you're able to talk straight to people and to stop and to be, step up and be proactive and stop the wrong things happening. If you are faced with opposition inside your own little loyal bubble, then you have to step out, and loyalty is to bigger causes. It's to the growth of, it's to our democratic country, our newly democratic country that after all is struggling to get on its feet, and to the principles of our constitution. I think that's a pretty solid rock on which we should all be standing, and we should be loyal to the constitution, not be loyal to a political party or a particular group of people, and so on, knowing that that's a complicated, grey, that's a tough space to navigate. But there's something about getting, and Cyril has done it, our president has done it, is putting words behind it, because as has been hinted to by several people already, this gap between what is on paper, as Dale was describing in the early days of the Communist Party, the gap between that and how people, leaders in particular, behave. We've got to close that gap. We've got to hold people accountable to the fact that they have to live according to what are the agreed principles of the organization, the party, the constitution, ultimately. And that should be our path. Everybody, every single citizen has got to be closing that gap, and that's what truth is all about, I think. And I think the more voices, particularly senior voices in all fields, that welcome debate, robust debate, welcome challenge, invite feedback, invite constructive feedback. It's got to be part of the culture built in, that it's okay to be criticized, be comfortable with being criticized, take it on the board, engage. Don't be defensive, don't be dismissive, don't try and chuck people out of the organization because they're critical. You want that. You want.
That's what can I bring Dale on that score, because the thought occurred to me that power over strategies don't actually work for the powerful either. And I just think what a loss to the South African Communist Party it is that Dale is no longer there.
Very briefly, I mean, I had already gotten into big trouble within the ANC in the early 90s, when in particularly the Yeovil branch, which had quite a number of senior ANC leaders, and simply asking the question, which many of us did at the time, what are you guys doing at CODESA? and what is going on and what are you agreeing to in our names. And that was basically, this notion of the gap between both institutionally, but also between, practice and rhetoric and other things is fundamental, because I think it's at the source, particularly within organizations, within the state and within parties. It's the source of a lot of this, what Catherine was talking about, this culture of quiescence, of silencing, of pseudo loyalty to the organization. In other words, there's this notion that the only way that you can get anywhere within the organization, within the state, is to go along. You go along with things. And if you don't, whatever that might be, well, then you're going to be pushed aside. You're going to be, and of course, if you blow a whistle on particular kinds of things, well, then, woe are you, because the consequences could be very extensive. And in my case, in the party, it was simple. And this speaks directly to what I'm talking about when your question was, what can parties do? The institutional architecture of an organization is fundamental to ensuring accountability and to ensuring the gap is closed. If we don't have that, so in the party, we had that architecture, but the leaders simply ignored it. They just treated it with contempt. And so when we insisted that you do these things because that's what we agreed to democratically, this is what our policies say, this is what our constitution says, then they push you out. And when you don't have a critical mass within the organization to support you because they're scared for material, for political, careerist reasons. When I was, to give you an example in SACP, when myself as the chairperson of the Johannesburg district, which was the largest district in the country, when we blew the whistle on a lot of the stuff that was going on in the SACP, we were all approached, 5 of us on the executive, and all offered senior government positions. I was offered in 1997 to go into the presidency's office and earn lots and lots of money. Four comrades did it. I refused, and I was sidelined. So in that sense, that in our context, it's not just about the institutional architecture. It's about making sure that in an organization and in everything else, people are taken care of. You need to be properly paid. You need to be properly taken. All the things that would encourage someone to be confident, someone to have the ability to say, yes, I want to speak out and do. These are fundamental. So you have to have a holistic perspective. And just one last thing I wanted to say, which was from my experience, is that if we don't call things out when they happen, then we are moving down a slope. So for example, I was very critical right from the beginning in the 90s of the way in which things were going in the SACP. I was told by people who now, 15 years later, are whistleblowers and now have seen the light, then to keep quiet, shut up, be loyal. How can you criticize Mandela? How can you criticize the ANC at this stage? The right wing, the enemies are out there. We do these things. So I think what I'm trying to say is, and I was labeled counter-revolutionary, ultra-left, all the other kinds of things, is that if we adopt a culture of being accepting and being, as Catherine said, being critical, then we stop this labeling, because right now labeling shuts everything down. We label according to race, we label according to ethnicity, we label according to gender, we label according to ideology, and that shuts everything down. And when that does, it encourages all the things that whistleblowers are against. Thank you.
You know, is that Denise?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, before you do, I just want to make this point, because the extraordinary thing is that I happen to be a Catholic, and I did a theological degree, and one of our professors of science of religion said every institutional organization must have 3 voices. It must have its priests, it must have its prophets, and it must have its pragmatists. And I think this applies just as well to a political movement. Any institution where truth matters, where values matter, will have its priests, its prophets, and the pragmatists are the one that try and hold them together, because the priests are about the past and the traditions, the prophets are about the future, and the pragmatist tries to get them on. If either of those voices are silenced and not allowed to participate, that institution is destined to fail over time. And I've always remembered that 20 years ago, and I wonder if it's a good critique of the ANC, of all other movements, and the Communist Party and others. So we try to sort of grapple with that, that complexity of dealing with these sort of different orientations being past, present, and future. But Denise?
And I'm speaking wearing a couple of hats, as a social scientist and having worked in the forensic field for about 30, 40 years. A pragmatic point of view has to be taken. First of all, if you want to whistleblow, you can't, the principle is perfect. I understand the ethics, and yes, it should be done, and we shouldn't stand back and be fearful. In law, there's a mediation body where you can go for mediation before you get a divorce, and everybody comes out semi-smiling, a little bit unhappy. There is no official body where somebody could go in for counseling and for managing the whole whistleblowing process strategically. First of all, the whistleblowing process is asymmetric. You are dealing with asymmetric power. Culture wins over strategy, hands down. If the culture is one which is not open and not transparent, you're going to be doing something against thunder, without me using the word. So before you go into the whistleblowing, you need to know, what are you up against? Who has capacity? What can they do? What is the nature of the people? What are the ideologies? What will they protect? Who are the stakeholders? How much power do they have that they could use against you? Now, you're probably aware from my name that I was involved with the Bosasa debate, and I lost millions as a result of their theft, and I whistleblew on them as well. Now, so you need to understand the terrain that you're entering into. Who are the people? Who are the personalities? Go in with knowledge, go in with insight, go in with counseling. And somebody, if you go into a court of law, you go in with your bundle. You've got all your evidence. You've got to produce best evidence. You've got to have your paper trail. They aren't interested in anecdotal stuff, hearsay. They want the facts. When you go in with whistleblowing, you must have prepared the ground. Now, most people are driven by emotion with the whistleblowing and ethics. Wonderful emotions are supported. Wonderful, the ethics are supported totally. I don't think anybody should just fly into a whistleblowing process without getting... John, you need preparation. You cannot just go full blast into an office to say, I'm going to whistleblow. You've got to go in tactfully, diplomatically, put your case over in a certain way, or you're up against power that can absolutely destroy you. I was poisoned in November. I was on my way to a commission where I was going to testify. 17th of November, I was poisoned. So cleverly, in coffee, in a restaurant that I didn't even know, and they had access to my medical records, because I was allergic to aspirin. 4,000 milligram of aspirin was in my coffee, as well as a very heavy duty sedative. What saved me is that I'd been to see an ear, nose and throat surgeon on the Friday who gave me massive doses of cortisone because I had a sinus infection. That saved me, but I still ended up in hospital. I know the other side of whistleblowing. And I backed off immediately and said, forget it, you've got the papers, I'm not going to the commissioners. And I think we should formally set up a body where we've got trained people, counselors, strategists, and teach people how to put together a bundle so they go in very level-headed in order to get results.
Denise, I'm just so grateful to you because you both exemplify this idea of the pragmatist who's basically integrated the priest and the prophet. You've also done something which, if those of you have seen my previous video series, which I called Tough Minds, Tender Hearts and Steady Hands, you have very much that idea of a tender heart. And what I'm hearing you say is that we mustn't just let our tender-heartedness eclipse our tough minds and our rigorous sense of actually grappling with the sort of the reality, and then to find other people who can help steady your hands so that you don't, kind of find yourself trembling. I mean, when I interviewed Musila Motepu, she was saying how in our conversation with her, she said she loves peas. She was so emotionally and anxious about what was happening to her. Her hands used to constantly shake, and she couldn't eat the peas off her plate because of the emotional impact of what was happening and the sense of kind of terror that she was going through. So this idea of the steady-handed person who just keeps and holds your hand perhaps and takes you through those stages. And I really would like to hope that your story still needs to be vindicated. Will it, Denise? Are you?
No. My sense of helplessness, because you're up against the media, they're very, very powerful, and one picks up on the other, because at the end of the day, they want to sell print.
Dale, any last words from you, friend?
Yeah, so my apologies for having to go. There's an interview that I have to do. But I just wanted to say, just on something that Denise made me think about this in terms of the support network. When we tried in Right to Know campaign, particularly over a decade-long period, to try to put in a whole range of support mechanisms for whistleblowers, because most of the whistleblowers that contacted us were not in corporations, did not have good jobs, well-paying jobs. They were very vulnerable to begin with. They didn't have any support network. They were fearful not only of their lives, but with all sorts of other kinds of, particularly women, and sexual violence and a whole range of other kinds of things. So if we're going to, my last word would be that we have to whistle in order to encourage, but also in order to create this counterculture that we're talking about, we need to put in place support mechanisms, because many people are not going to blow the whistle, and many people are going to keep quiet if they think the price to be paid is too high. And that's what from the experience of the past within the sort of civil society space in particular, is when you have a collective to support you materially, emotionally, and otherwise, your ability to be an effective whistleblower, to sustain that whistleblowing, to fight the battle that is going to come, is exponentially strengthened. And I think that's fundamentally important. And as we move forward, otherwise, always it's going to be whistleblowers standing on the side, basically being very brave, but also being very, very vulnerable. And that's not the way to go forward.
You know, if you say, Denise, you feel a little bit sort of intimidated still by this guy. When Mark Caruso went after me with this defamation slap suit, when I was all by myself, it was terrifying. And then the guy actually went after 6 other people, and suddenly we had a solidarity network. And as a consequence of us, we've now got this Asina Yaliso campaign against slap suits and all the rest. It's given me confidence. And now that's why I'm now so excited of supporting whistleblowers. I don't know if it's any consolation to you, Denise, but I also, with the other clients that I've been counseling, I said, you know, when power over strategies are used, it's actually a sign that they actually have lost confidence in their own narrative. And the only way they can do is shut things down. When a person is at peace with themselves, they won't feel the need to use those dreadful intimidation tactics that you've been through. But Denise, I want to, sorry, I interrupted you. Please carry on and tell us a bit more about your experience.
So I'm saying there should be a formal body, and I agree with the counseling, that this body should just nurse. We don't stop people. We nurse them through the process where they understand there's a strategy involved. They need to understand the personalities. They need to be very level-headed about it. They need to understand who they can align with in the organization or elsewhere, who could befriend them and gently help them through this, getting rid of the emotion so that people might back off if they think this might be dangerous terrain.
John Curtis, you sitting there behind the scenes, if you wouldn't mind making a contribution as a person that has that role as being a cartoonist, as the real prophet of our times.
I just made a couple of notes while everyone was talking to see what perspective I could bring in as a cartoonist. As cartoonists, we're the praise singers of whistleblowers, and we often come from the same perspective as they do. We're fighting the same battles, but I don't think we put ourselves in the firing line as much as they do. Our job is to expose, and to the greater part, we're protected by our publications and our editors to do so. But we love the fact that when the whistle is blown, there's a change in the narrative, and we get an opportunity to do a positive cartoon for once, because the drudgery of just going on and on and on about all the crime and grime gets tiresome, and when somebody is exposed, that gives us sort of a lot of relief, and I think has brought a lot of good cartoons out by the many cartoonists in this country. From our perspective, I mean, we speak truth to power like whistleblowers do, and we're often the subject of the same ridicule or attempts to suppress us by the targets of our cartoons that whistleblowers are subjected to. And I mean, that's been taken to extreme levels around the world, where cartoonists have received death threats, and in fact, I've received a death threat before, but I didn't take it too seriously. And some have even been killed. We're not in the same league as whistleblowers in terms of changing the trajectory of ill doing, but we love to amplify their work and to do what we can to sort of assist in their work.
Well, John, can I just say, I'm still reeling from that cartoon you and Dr. Jack did, which was used to illustrate Mark Hayward's editorial recently on Daily Maverick. I mean, it just hit me straight in the stomach, I tell you. And that's why I've got such admiration for cartoonists, because you have that ability to get to the point very creatively and artistically. So I want to honor you for that, and just to tell everybody else. I've also got a very interesting conversation up with Zapiro about 18 months ago, which we go into these issues about how the role of the court jester and the fact that it is a permitted role to tease a king and to poke fun at him and all the rest. But there's also a boundary that there's there. And in a sense, sometimes you've got to cross it. And Zapiro talks about his own experience. And I just want to refer people to that if you haven't seen it already, because I think you make an excellent point. Cartoonists and whistleblowers are complementary roles. And that's why I've enjoyed getting to know you, John. Yeah. Anybody else want to comment, Dan or John or Pops? You want to say something as well?
Yes. Hello, John. Thanks. I am Pops Ramphersad from the Active Citizens Movement. We have taken a keen interest on whistleblowers and their plight, and we have made a submission to the State Capture Commission on strengthening of the legislation. Some of the things that we find with whistleblowers is after the horse has bolted. And we're soon going to have a local government election preceded next year, or the year thereafter with the national and provincial election. I think it's time we call on all political parties to do a lifestyle audit on any of their candidates that are going to be contesting elections. Now, this is one of the ways in which I think we can minimize corruption that exists in the country and make perhaps there will be less need than for whistleblowers who find themselves in a terrible plight. So I just want to put it, it's unfortunate that General Bantu Holomisa is not here, because I would have liked to throw that question directly to him in terms of his party. At least someone needs to make a start. And I'm sure if we have all political, well, it is a start with lifestyle audit for candidates. We're going to see something very beautiful happening in this country with respect to corruption and containing it. Thank you very much for allowing me this opportunity.
Catherine, do you want to comment on that? Thank you so much.
To build on what Pops is saying, I do think that it's important to get the voices of people who are in political parties, because I think we must steer away from thinking the political parties are monolithic. There are definitely people inside the ANC, certainly Holomisa's party and so on, who I think would absolutely agree with everything we're doing, but they have taken the strategic position where they are wanting to work from the inside, change from the inside, and so on. So I think that we need to hear them. We need to hear people who are leadership embedded inside parties as to what their position is, because I think it's very easy on the outside to be judgmental, moralistic, critical, and so on, unconstructively, and say should, ought. And actually, it's much more difficult to actually shift the mindset of people inside.
Andrew Feinstein, when we had that dialogue with him and Roland, your brother, he made the point that it was two ANC members of parliament, I think they were, who blew the whistle. He didn't see himself as a whistleblower, and Andrew didn't. He said they came to him and they trusted him and they blew the whistle on what was happening in the arms deal. And to this day, we don't know who they are. So there's a sense in which mostly a person in a party that's blowing the whistle very publicly, you could suspect their agenda. They wanted to get attention, all the rest. But I think that there's a very interesting point about how do we provide some sort of support system to political parties so that there can be voices of dissent which need to be kept quiet, kept out of the limelight, but that the truth gets through and gets appropriately handled. So I think that's probably just an idea that's taking shape. John Curtis, I wanted to ask you also to comment on Denise's point about the media, you know, because you there as the representative in a sense of the media, and the fact that she said that the media was not a safe harbor for her.
Yes, well, I mean, unfortunately, it rings true. Listening to Denise's story, it echoes your experiences, John. And
with other clients of mine, I need to say, you know, with Aris Danikas, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, without knowing this, the particulars, all I can say is, unfortunately, the media, you know, there are elements in the media that don't play fair, and I'm sorry, very sorry to have heard of her experiences, but I hope the two of you exchange notes and that you do pick up on it, Denise, because these things do need to be exposed. Incidentally, Denise, I had to pop over to Google just now to see whether I thought to myself, there can't have been two Denise Bjorkmans. And I don't know if you recall, but you were an advertiser in my newspaper in the 1980s, the Home Finder.
Yes, I remember that clearly.
Yeah.
Well,
good to see you again. It's that was 35 years ago.
Well, it certainly dates me, but you look so young, so you're not in my league.
Yeah, well, that's what being a cartoonist keeps you young, but he's also got children, so I'm surprised he hasn't got more grey hairs now. But
the grey is starting to emerge. It looks like it's going to move bottom up. Is that how it happens, John?
Well,
in the bed.
One joke I will make, what is an antidote to developing the hubris syndrome and becoming, you know, too high in your own juice when you get powerful? And I always thought that the disadvantage poor Cecil John Rhodes had is that he never had teenage children to keep him humble. Because one thing you learn from your children is that you can force a person to submit, but you cannot force them to cooperate. You know, use a power over strategy to intimidate them, but boy, they're going to do what they want. And so the question then becomes, how do you get people to cooperate? Well, you just be truthful with them. And my experience of love working with children, they see through the bullshit very clearly. You know, children are not powerful. Therefore, they sometimes have an ability to see reality in ways that we can't. They're not necessarily able to interpret reality because they haven't yet developed the cognitive thing, but they can see it. So that's another thing, is that we must cultivate, as I know citizens of conscience wanting to do, in schools, to encourage a culture of whistleblowing at that level and find avenues where children, when they see something wrong, that they can have a safe place where they can go to and not get bullied and shut up and ending up with, you know, the disastrous situations of gangs forming and etc. as you see. Okay, Stanley Sher, I know that you have been listening and you're always a wise man with thoughts to offer. Is there anything you want to contribute before we wrap up?
Strangely, being a wise man, it's me the teacher today, and it's your last comment which actually resonates with what I've been thinking of right from the start. That culture where rhetoric rules rather than doing the right thing, recognizing that the right thing goes through lots of different lenses and things. And the potential situation that you've just mentioned happening in schools, I think that confident educators don't mind being challenged. Now, not every educator is a confident one. So it becomes the right answers, which are not necessarily the right thing, and whoever is more outspoken tends to be recognized as a leader. So our understanding of leadership is hugely problematic throughout our culture. So I do think that rather than having whistleblower studies to add to the contested curriculum, where everything should be taught in school, I think the culture in schools where authority is such an important thing, and what is the authority, my power, my position, or what we are saying, and can what we say be challenged? It's important. And I think it does happen in classrooms where there's good learning going on, and it's something to strive for. It's not going to happen everywhere. I suppose we'll always be dealing with these issues. So hurrah that you're talking about support groups at this level. Yeah, I would want to join you in campaigning for that, so that more of the right thing can be not only spoken about. We're really good at speaking, but not doing. So thanks, everyone. I really enjoyed the wisdom that's come out of.
George Shubane, I know that you've been sitting observing, and I know you well, and you're a man that I've got huge admiration for. Do you want to say anything?
Oh, thank you very much, Sir John, and the team. I think you caught me when Stanley, Sher have already taken all my words. But I would like to say, listening to all the speakers, I've just learned a lot, firstly. And two is that I agree that the new culture of greed and corruption is even taking churches as well. We are facing a scenario where churches are now about money-making schemes. So it's quite a new culture that we are faced with. But on top of it is that I really agree with the previous speakers when they say that we need a lot of focus on what I called social and economic cohesion rooted in Ubuntu principles. Because that's what we have lost. We have lost the agenda of unity in diversity, which is part and parcel of my book on Nation Building Plan 2020. And the second one is the fact that the ideas that you are bringing in here, and I like the comment that says from one colleague of us of Life Skill Audit. On top of that, we also need to put up a very vibrant institution to deal with whistleblowers. Because even if they are using for personal issues, there's more to it. And I think my proposal is that let's institutionalize good ideas. And once they are institutionalized, we're going to make an effect and impact. Thank you very much, Sir John.
In conclusion, going back to my conversation with Themba, I've been thinking some more about a point we discussed. I said that I'd been listening to the Revolutions podcast on the US War of Independence, which made the point that history was this endless tug-of-war between power and liberty. And I suggested that perhaps more correctly should be a tug-of-war between power and truth. Well, I'm now listening to the series on the French Revolution, and it's led me to rethink it, and maybe it's not a binary dualism at all. Maybe it's a ternary dance between power, liberty, and truth, which fits very well with this beautiful Celtic symbol, which is inscribed in a Viking runestone, which predates all the revolutions. Well, my mentor, Professor Manfred Max Neer, for the Barefoot Economist, who died sadly 2 years ago, he interpreted that symbol as the world survival trinity of nature, humanity, and technology, and saw within that dance between them a perfect representation of the interdependence and harmony that needs to exist with all three elements, with no one overwhelming the other. Well, it occurred to me that why not power, truth, and liberty also dancing in harmony? Well, that works for me. And maybe we won't need anymore to blow the whistle to stop the game and dish out red and yellow cards, because if we get those three forces into balance, we create a culture which would encourage truth-seeking and promote liberty, and then shape healthy mutual empowerment. So maybe all that is needed is to develop a new operating system that transcends binaries in search of this ternary, non-dualistic integration of these three forces that creates a new culture of appreciation of those who are seeking, leaking, and speaking truth within power.